Hello everyone, and welcome to Fertile Ground with Mike and Coach. My name is Mike Cornell, and this is Coach Ron Lathey. We have a question for you. Did you know that there were two types of deaths in the Bible, and Coach, one really stinks?
It sure does.
And as we get started, we have three things we would like for you to think about and to consider, and the first one is this. Why is Jesus' I am declaration so important to Christianity? And this is a really good spot that if you're a note taker, to grab your Bible, grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, and follow right along with us here today. Second of all, why do you think Jesus called Lazarus by name? And that is a really interesting question as we do that. And then finally, why was the resurrection of Lazarus so miraculous? And today we continue our quarterly study titled Partners in a New Creation. And Coach, here we go. We've been in the Gospel of John for the last 3 weeks, and this week takes us there again. And we're going to be in John chapter 11, looking at verses 17 through 27, and then we're going to skip over to verses 38 through 44. And the title of our study today is The Word Resurrects. And could you get us started with some prayer and just kind of set the context for us?
Sure. Let us pray. Our most kind and loving Heavenly Father, again, what a privilege it is, Lord, to come to your house. And Lord, we just thank you for all the blessings that you give us each day. We pray, Lord, for those that were not able to make it out today, and for whatever reason it might be, Lord, we know there's a lot of sickness going on right now, and Lord, some people are at home, not able to get out. Others may be in nursing homes or just simply in the hospitals. But we just ask, Lord, that you would bless them wherever they might be. Lord, as we look into the lesson today, we're going to be talking about the resurrection and what it means to be resurrected, and then we're going to look at one of the stories that where Jesus actually performed the resurrection, and it was a great miracle. And we need to understand, Lord, that the resurrection is one of the main topics that people need to understand and realize is a big part of our beliefs. Now, Lord, we just ask now as we open your word that you open our hearts. And Lord, just to speak to us through that still small voice. This we ask through your Son's precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, we are going to continue in the study of John. And we are going to talk about a lot about death today, Mike. And one of the things I want people to make sure they understand right from the beginning is humans were not meant to die.
Right.
When God created humans, Adam was created as a perfect, sinless human being, and death was not in the mix at this time. But we know after the fall, after Adam and Eve had disobeyed God and ate from the forbidden tree, we know that brought sin and death into being, even in the Garden of Eden. So this, for a lot of us, we've all lost loved ones. We've all had to go through the sting of death, as we sometimes call it, sting. And most people, it's really, really a tough time. But we're going to look at the different positions of whether a person is a Christian or not a Christian, and what a difference that makes. And so hopefully we'll make you think about some things today. We know that we're going to look at today at the story of Lazarus and how Jesus resurrected him or raised him from the grave. Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha, who are quite prominent in the New Testament Gospels. And we know that Jesus really loved this family. In fact, they lived in a little town called Bethany, and Bethany was just across the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem, only a couple miles from Jerusalem. And a lot of times when Jesus was going to Jerusalem, he would stop in there and actually stay with them. So he was very close to this family. And as we go through this, we'll see how that comes into play. We're also going to look at something. One of the verses is which deals with one of our questions, talks about Jesus saying that I am something. And we find out that John, throughout his gospel, actually talks about 7 different places where the words I am come into play. And Jesus says that I am different things. He says that I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And lastly, I am the true vine. These are what we call the 7 I am statements of John. And this is, we'll talk a lot about that as we get into our lesson itself. So what we're going to look at here is we said that Jesus is going to come. He's on his way to Jerusalem again. In fact, he's been in Jerusalem, and he's coming back to another place in his trip, and he's finds out from a runner or a carrier that Lazarus has fallen sick. And of course, Mary and Martha have called or sent the people or the person to get him, maybe to try to see if he can heal Lazarus before anything happens drastically. But what we find out is that Jesus is going to use this particular situation to illustrate and try to explain to some people a very important concept. Yeah. So we find out, of course, that he tells the runner or the man that brought the message, he said, don't worry, Lazarus' sickness will not lead to death. And then he waits a while and actually shows up a couple days after Lazarus has died. So that kind of sets the stage of where we begin with our lesson.
Well, death is front and center in our segment today. And Coach, I read an interesting statistic recently. The world's population is soon going to reach 8 billion people. That's 8 billion people on this little tiny planet. And a wise man once told me, nobody gets out alive. Right. That means every single one of, at least not physically. Yeah. Every single one of those 8 billion people and all the people that have come before those 8 billion is going to die, at least physically. And our segment today is going to show us how Jesus overpowers death. Right. So it should be a real exciting segment. I'm looking forward to really unpacking it here. So we'll begin with John chapter 11, looking at verses 17 and 18 to begin with, Coach. And here we see status. And God's Word says this. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. So it probably took the messenger, Coach, about a day to get to Jesus. And Jesus waited 2 more days before leaving to go to Bethany. Right.
Right. So as we said, when he got there, we know that Lazarus was already dead. In fact, Lazarus had already been in the grave. And that's what our first verse there says. He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. And that, Mike, is significant because the Jews, first of all, because of the climate they lived in, they wanted to get the body in the ground as soon as possible. And they tried most of the time in the very same day to bury the body. Because of the climate there, the body would begin to decay very, very quickly. And the other thing we find is that they had, because they put the body in quickly, they had what they called a death watch, where they would actually watch and make sure they didn't put somebody that was still alive, somebody maybe that was just unconscious by mistake, into the grave. And that death watch was for 3 days. So this was beyond the death watch time, and the 4th day. So Jesus had been legally declared, or Lazarus had been legally declared dead by now. Yeah. And the Jews often thought that the soul of the body, the other reason that they had this death watch, that the soul of the body actually hovered over the grave or the body of the deceased for 3 days, and then eventually left the body. So again, all this had to take place before a person was declared totally dead. So we find out here that Jesus, as we said, comes, and even though Bethany is only a couple miles there from Jerusalem, from where he was, it was a full day's travel. And so in any event, he ends up there at the time where Lazarus is now 4 days in the grave. So he is definitely dead. There's no question about that. And that's part of his plan too, as we will see. But we find out here that it's, for Mary and Martha, of course, they're going through the grieving process.
Sure.
And, everybody that goes through that, if you are a Christian, you have one aspect. If you're not a Christian, you have another aspect. Because we certainly believe that if you are a Christian, or the person that dies that is a Christian, you'll see them again. And if you're not a Christian, or they are not a Christian, that's not going to happen. So the ladies are in mourning, but at the same time, we're going to find they believe very much in Jesus and his abilities.
There were things that Jesus did that the disciples thought were perplexing all throughout his ministry, and they came to later understand why on certain things. This was one of those occasions.
Right.
First of all, everybody there knew that Jesus loved Lazarus very much. He was very, very close to Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And so one of the questions the disciples probably had is, why did he even let him get sick to start with? Because he does have the power for that not to be. Second of all, they're probably wondering, why the delay? Your really, really good, close personal friend is ill, in an illness that could lead to physical death. Why aren't you going? Why aren't you in a hurry to get to his sisters?
Right.
And for that matter, could he have not healed Lazarus from a distance? I mean, there's a lot of things going through the disciples' heads here. And as he did the nobleman's son earlier that we heard about. The record makes it clear that there was a strong love relationship between Jesus and this family.
Yes.
That it was very intimate. But everything that Jesus did up to this point in our narrative seems odd.
Right.
But like you said, he has a plan, and it really, when you consider that plan in the overall context of everything, it really is brilliant.
Yes.
It's divine, actually.
Right.
And that takes us to our next practical point, our very first practical point, and it says, God is always on time, even when we think he's late. Just like the disciples did.
Exactly. As you said, I'm sure, were wondering, what are we waiting for? And so this illustrates one of the hardest things for us as humans to really grasp, I think, the idea of God's timing on things.
Sure.
And, we often look and wait for God and keep wondering, when is he going to show up? Or, why hasn't he answered my prayer or whatever? So we need to realize that God's timetable rarely matches our timetable. So we can only see things from our perspective. God has to look at things as the whole picture and his whole program. And so we have to be careful, as we sometimes want to just do everything in our time. We think it ought to happen this way, and then this, and God doesn't think that way. So that's one of the things that we realize. God may appear to be late, but we will find out that if we are truly seeking his will in whatever's going on, we'll find out that he's right on time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, the idea of being in his will and knowing what he wants us to do. God will show up when it's time.
Well, we have to trust that.
That's right.
We have to trust
where faith comes in.
Right. We have to trust God's timing in all parts of our life.
Right.
All right, let's go on to verse 19. And it says, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And Coach, Martha and Mary must have been really incredible people. It seems like a lot of people thought well of them here.
Yeah, they have a huge group that have come to pay their respects to Lazarus and the family itself. And like I said, at Bethany only being a couple miles from Jerusalem, I'm sure there were people there from both towns. And probably just about everybody from Bethany would be there. And then many of the people from Jerusalem must have come, and it was a large crowd that were all there. But again, as we'll find out, this plays right into Jesus' plan as well. Yep. Even some of the Jewish leaders. So, that they may have been Martha and Mary and Lazarus may have been a somewhat wealthy, we don't know, but they were known in the leaders' circle, in Jerusalem. So even some of the leaders were there from Jerusalem. And they came, it says, to give their support, just like we do for people that we know that lose loved ones. So it indicates that the family was well established in the community.
Yeah, it really does. And it's important to note here that the Jews are presented in a very positive light too, Coach, coming to comfort those who were the followers of Jesus.
Right.
Because not all the Jews, as a matter of fact, not very many of the Jews actually were Jesus' followers. Right. So that goes to show you the type of reputation that they had in the community. But this passage also says something really about Martha and Mary and how they lived before others in their community, because even though they were followers of Jesus, the other Jews did not use that as a barrier.
No.
So apparently the respect level for them was so high that they got past that. And as we continue to look at these other verses, we're actually going to look right into the heart of Jesus.
Right.
As we see how he processes this whole event, not only as God, but as a man. Because this was his friend, and we're going to see it affecting.
Right.
And that takes us to verse 20, and we're going to combine verse 20 and 21 as we move along. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So at this point in the narrative, we are told that as soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she left the house and ran out to meet him. Right.
Well, this kind of reminds us of another time Martha and Mary, Jesus was in their home staying with them. And what we see here is Martha's kind of the one of action. She reacts to things quickly, where Mary kind of sits back and stays back and kind of takes the road of wait and see. But Martha is one of action, and as soon as Jesus comes, or she hears that Jesus is coming down to the road, she runs out to greet him and meet him before he even gets there. So she is very anxious to see Jesus. And she says, when she gets there, she says, Lord, if you would have been here on the right time, my brother wouldn't have died. Now that's an interesting statement. Yes, because what we know here, what we see, is that Martha now thinks that Jesus has come too late.
Yep.
And which would be a normal human thought. But at the same time, she also shows her great faith in Christ, in that she tells him, if you would have come, he would have probably been, we know you can heal people. We've seen you do that. You've performed those kind of miracles before. So they were very aware that he could have kept Lazarus from dying. So that's where we see her faith in this situation. And as we look here, her statement is basically an expression of faith and confidence in Jesus. Now, as you mentioned before, we know from earlier stories in the text that Jesus, first of all, didn't have to come at all.
Right.
You know, he could have stayed where he was, but as we said, he's got a better or greater purpose right now in mind. And what we see here is that Jesus was you know, he was sorry for the family. You know, he knew what they were going through because, as you mentioned, he was feeling some of these same emotions. Jesus was human. We never want to forget that. He's 100% human, so he had human emotions and human feelings. And we're going to see that this was not easy for him to see, first of all, know that his friend had died, but as a creator of everything, knowing that when this creation was made, there was no sin and there was no death.
Right.
So he's looking not only at his friend dying, but what a waste it was, because he fixed it in the beginning that there would be no death. So he's really affected also, like we said, with his human feelings.
It's real interesting here too, Coach, to look at how these two different ladies who were very, very close to Jesus processed this whole thing differently. And really, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's the way we are too as well. You look at Mary remained in the house, really helps us to understand the mourning process of the Jewish faith.
Right.
That was typical. that, you know, Mary staying in the house and staying seated, that the mourners coming to comfort
Right.
her would have been expecting to see her there.
Mm-hmm.
Martha, when she heard that Jesus was coming, got up and ran out. And these are two different reactions in the way they process it. It doesn't mean that Martha's faith was any better because of the way she reacted, and it doesn't mean Mary's faith was any better, and it doesn't mean that one had more faith than the other.
No.
And it's just really, really interesting to that. This past weekend, I had the privilege to preach at a funeral, and talking about, you know, in context of how people process the whole death of a loved one differently.
Right.
And, you know, and there were numerous people there, and you could, especially as being the speaker, you can watch everybody in the crowd and watch how they're all processing it differently. And, you know, these two ladies are believers, so they're going to process it generally in the same way. But there's a huge difference between when a believer in Jesus processes death of a loved one, or if that loved one was a born-again Christian,
Right.
or one that doesn't know Christ.
Right.
There's a totally different process going on.
Yeah, even the air around the funeral is different.
It is.
You know, right.
It truly is. And God uses death many, many times, Coach, to draw us, the death of a loved one, to draw us closer to Himself.
Right.
You know, He took this thing that's just despicable, because mankind was not created to die, like
Right.
you mentioned. But He takes this what's despicable to Him and turns it into a way to draw others closer to Himself. It really shows how much He loves us
Right.
when you think about it. All right, and that takes us on to verse 22. And it says, and here we see frustration. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So Martha's words here seem to confirm that in the previous verse, she was not expressing any hope at all that her brother would be raised from the dead.
No, she's just kind of, I think, explaining again her position that she knows that Jesus was there late, and if He had gotten there, He would have been able to save her brother. But she also understands that this apparently was God's will, you know, which we have to take that attitude as well sometimes. You know, sometimes God, you know, takes some of our loved ones, and it is His will, and no amount of prayer, no amount of anything else we can do, no, nothing. The doctors can't save them, you know, and there's nothing there. So when God takes them, that is their time, so to speak.
Sure.
And we know that here Martha is just simply, her statement is just saying it's really another expression of confidence in Jesus.
Right.
That, you know, I think she was kind of trying to express to Him, don't feel bad that you're late, because I know what you could have done, but it must be God's will. That would be my interpretation of that. So she was confident that Jesus could do what she was asking her to do. And in this case, it was just, you know, Lazarus, it was his time to die. But she's going to get a big surprise.
Yeah, she really is. But,
Yeah.
you know, getting inside of Martha's head a little bit here, being the devout Jew that she has been her entire life growing up, she knows that 3-day period has come and gone.
Right.
And she knows that decay has really set in, especially on the 4th day.
Right.
And so she is not even wrapping her mind around that that's even on the table, or could be.
No.
And that takes us to verse 23, and we're going to combine that with 24. And here we see life. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And verse 24 says, Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So in response to Martha's statement of faith, really, Coach, in the previous verse, Jesus made a promise to her here.
Yeah, and it's still kind of a veiled promise. You know, He doesn't come right out and say that I'm gonna raise your brother. You know, he just simply tells her, it says, your brother will rise again. This was not a new concept. This was a Jewish concept from the Old Testament times, that they felt that in the last days, so to speak, is the way they would refer to it, that they knew that their bodies would be brought from the grave again, and that's what Jesus is talking about here. It is the resurrection of the body, and we know too that there were even some of the leaders, of the Jewish leaders, who didn't believe that. We hear a lot about the Pharisees and the Sadducees being the two main groups of leaders in the Jewish leadership, and we know that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, and so if any of them were there, that would have pricked their ears up of what Jesus was going to say. So there were those that believed and those that did not believe. According to, I guess in Acts, I believe it tells us about the Sadducees who didn't believe in the resurrection. In fact, they didn't believe in a lot of things, including angels, and really not much about the afterlife at all. Right. So, there was a lot of confusion there. But we find out, too, that many did believe, and Martha certainly was one that believed. And we find out in the Old Testament that they did believe this by going and looking back at Daniel, the book of Daniel, chapter 12. And verse 2 says, "And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting contempt." So they were very aware of this resurrection. So here Jesus is talking about, a resurrection, but not again the way that Martha is thinking. Martha is one of these that believes in the here and now, and she, as you said, once the death watch was over, she thought that was not possible until the very last days. And we know that same thing with us. One of these days, if you are a Christian, we know that our bodies are going to be resurrected as well. And that's what we now call the rapture. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul tells us a lot about that. And one of the last things he says, "I tell you this so that you will be hopeful." This is the part that gives us hope. If you are a Christian, and it's like, most of you have been watching know that my wife passed away last March. And one of the things that I know, because she was a Christian, I'm a Christian, one of these days we're going to be united again. And if you're not a Christian, that's not going to happen. So it's nice, many people would offer their condolences to me and say, "We're sorry for your loss." And my normal retort to that was, nothing's lost if you know where it is. Yeah. And that's just the way that we feel. The Christians have a whole different outlook, than the non-Christians do. And that's kind of the way Martha is here. She is a believer.
She truly is, and she thinks that Jesus is referring to that big reunion at the end of time, and we would too. Sure. Come to think of it. But what Jesus was about to do seemed so impossible that it didn't even seem possible for her to even think about it. Mm-hmm. And that has a loud message for us today, Coach. For all who believe, it is true that Jesus has the power to do what is otherwise impossible. We have to remember that all things are possible through Christ who strengthens us. So actually, a scripture in Philippians chapter 4, looking at verse 13, and it says, "I can do everything through him," talking about Jesus, "who gives me strength." Right. And that just plays right into this in a big way.
Another thing people need to realize too, the resurrection of Christ is the most significant event in all history. Yeah. And that's what separates Christians from all religions, is because we still believe that Jesus was resurrected from the dead and is alive still today. No other religious group can say that their leader is still alive. And so Christianity, folks, is the only true. It's not even a religion, but it's a relationship. And our leader is still alive and well and still helping us even today.
Yeah, and that really plays right into that practical point that just came up. And it says, "We say we believe Jesus Christ can do anything, but we often doubt he can meet our need. That's an interesting statement.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened to Martha here. You know, she knew deep down that she'd already expressed that Jesus could do anything, you know, but it had gone through her natural thinking process that, well, the watch is over, so it's too late. She never even went ahead to think of the as you said, the supernatural powers of Christ.
Right. We
often do that same thing. So if we say we believe in Christ, of course, that's the first big if. You know, words are cheap. It's easy to say we believe in Christ, and at the same time, it's often like Martha here, maybe we don't really believe enough in what Christ can do. To believe means to accept the result as if it's already happened. You know, and that's what Jesus was trying to get her to do a little bit. You know, as if Lazarus was already raised, but she kept looking into the future. We often pray that God will answer our prayers about something like this, but we really don't have an expectation that's based on faith. You know, we'd like for this to happen, but do you really believe it's going to happen? And that's our faith coming in. But we have to realize too that when we pray, the answers to prayer can take three forms. Sometimes God says yes, sometimes he says no, sometimes he says wait a while. And you know, so that doesn't mean he's not going to answer our prayer. So we have to believe, again, as we talked about, that God's timing is perfect. And that's what, again, Jesus is waiting on things here before he does his miracle that we're going to see. But Martha's response gives us a great example. She knew and believed that Jesus could save her brother if he had just got there in time. But she believed in the words that Jesus told her about the future resurrection. But like millions of people today, she didn't take into account the supernatural power of Christ. And, you know, the way it is today, people today don't believe in anything that's not, if it's supernatural, that it can happen. Most people today don't believe in anything that can't be seen or felt or explained by science. They don't believe in it. So, you know, we got to realize that our God is a God of miracles. He's a supernatural God. He can make things happen that no one else can make, because it's his world. He created it, and it's under his control and under his sovereignty. So that's one of the things we don't believe enough in our faith of God.
Yep, totally agree with all that. All right, let's go on to verse 25 and verse 26, and here we see life. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? There's the question of the hour.
Right.
Here we have the fifth of the 7 I am statements here that John recorded that Jesus spoke here in the Gospel of John.
Right. You know, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And like I said, that's when he said, I am the resurrection. Again, the resurrection, knowing that he was going to go through that himself. And he had affirmed himself to be the one who not only was going to be resurrected, but was going to have the power to resurrect others. Mm-hmm. And so not only would he arise from the death, but he would also be the source of resurrection for all those who die. And again, now we're talking about, again, that's all the Christians that are going to be raised at the time of the rapture. You know, it's through Jesus' power that's going to happen, because he's already been there, he's already done that. And we need to kind of look at it this way. The resurrection is not an event, it's a person. And the person is Jesus Christ. So, you know, we know that we will be raised to eternal life. And our eternal life actually starts the moment you accept Jesus Christ. And that eternal means it's going to be forever. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is saying that I am the resurrection. and in him is the power to raise anyone from death into life, not only spiritually, but even physically, we find, as he did for himself.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk here about death. And in the Bible, death, when death is mentioned, it's really talking about separation. And physical death is the separation from the soul, from the body. Where an eternal death is a separation of the person from God forever. And it's talking about a guy that's sick here, Lazarus. He was sick. And unsaved people are not just sick, they are spiritually dead. When people are physically dead, they do not respond to such things as food, as temperature, or pain, or whatever. But when people are spiritually dead, they do not respond to spiritual things.
Right.
And they are not interested in God, the Bible, Christians, or church until the Holy Spirit really begins to work on their heart. Revelation 20:14 calls hell the second death, that is eternal death.
Right.
What sinners dead to God's ways need is not education, medicine, morality, or religion. They need a new life in Christ. And I'm telling you, if you don't hear anything else we say, that's probably the most important thing that both of us are saying here today.
Yeah, anybody that's not a believer, anybody that's not accepted Christ, you're dead right now, spiritually. And until you accept Christ who gives life, you stay in that condition.
This right here is really a pretty marked point in history. Because here Jesus is declaring who he really is. Who Jesus is and what Jesus does marks this decisive shift right here in God's relationship with the world. That's exactly what's happening. And when he raises Lazarus from the dead, as we're going to see here in a few verses, there's a lot of effects that happened when that occurred. And that takes us really, Coach, to that very first question. We've been talking about these I am statements through the whole segment here today, and it says, why is Jesus' I am declaration so important to Christianity?
Well, it's really the idea that began clear back in the book of Genesis, talking about Moses' relationship with God. If we remember Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai, and Moses was told by God, I'm going to send you down to the pharaohs in Egypt to bring my people back to their land. And when Moses asked God, he said, well, when I stand in front of Pharaoh, who am I supposed to say sent me down here? And God simply said, you tell him I am sent you. And, so that kind of is a little bit hard to understand sometimes, but the I am simply, as we said, there's 7 I am statements in John there, but basically here's what he was saying. The 7 I am statements that I mentioned earlier, well, there's more really than 7 that we're talking about here, because these apply more to today. The first thing you need to realize is I am real. A lot of people don't believe there is a God.
Yep.
Another one could be I am alive. We said that we serve a God that is alive. He's not like other religion gods. I am your judge. I am the only way to heaven. I am a covenant keeper. And that's very important, knowing that God is going to keep all the covenant, all the promises that he has promised throughout the Bible. I am means also that I have always been. And that was one of the things he was trying to tell Moses. The fact that I am simply means that I have been since eternity past to the present to the future. And he says, I exist. I am. And it also means that I am the creator. I am sovereign over everything. I will always be. And later on in Revelation, he calls himself the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So these I am statements are simply God describing that he is everything. And he's over everything and in control of everything.
Yeah, when Jesus uses the phrase I am, he made specific revelations regarding his identity and nature. It's kind of neat to watch these things come together. These revelations made it very clear to all of them that he was claiming that he was much more than a teacher, and he was much more than a prophet, which many people thought he was, and many people today still think that's all he was. But Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, and the Messiah is simply, Coach, God in human form.
Right.
And in John's Gospel, you know, there are 7 I am statements that which you have mentioned. And in the Old Testament, God referred to himself as I am. It's really neat to watch Jesus connecting himself with the Old Testament, because you and I both know what the relevance of that is.
Sure.
Because Jesus came to fulfill the Old Testament.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's really, really neat to watch this all come together. And that takes us to verse 27. And here we see belief. And it says, "Yes, Lord," she replied, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." So in response to Jesus' question in the previous verse, "Believest thou this?" is what the King James says. Martha answered him here.
Yeah, it's interesting how she did too. She was, she answered in almost the same terms that Peter did.
Yeah. When
Jesus asked him, "Who do men say that I?" or says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter pretty much mentioned the same things that Martha did. He said, "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And if you remember Jesus' response said, "Blessed are you, Simon Peter, because man did not reveal this to you. Only God in heaven revealed this to you." And this is what Martha has seen. She knows that Jesus is the Son of God. He is the promised Messiah that they've been waiting on. So she sees who he is, and her answer revealed her, again, this deep, genuine faith she has in him. And again, that's the question that we've talked about before, that everybody in the sound of our voice right now has to answer that question.
Yep.
You're being asked it. Who do you say this person Jesus is? And again, you can't just look at it from man's eyesight. You have to understand the supernatural, power of Almighty God, and to believe, because honestly, as we're seeing here, God oftentimes is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So that's where the faith comes in. But Martha has seen the light, so to speak, and she knows exactly who this is, and she's making a statement for all to hear.
Well, and that was the point I was getting ready to make, because here we are, we hear Jesus ask that question, "Who do you say that I am?" And now it's recorded for all of mankind to read, and we're reading it today over 2,000 years later. This still has significant bearing on the faith and testimony of Jesus Christ.
Right.
It's really neat. And that takes us to our next practical point. True faith is strongest when it is needed the most. And it appears Martha and Mary both need it right here.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they've lost their beloved brother, they think. And we find out that, it's just like in our lives. When things are really going great in our lives, we get really complacent. And we kind of put God up on the shelf, and because we don't really we don't think we need him right at that time because things are going well. So what we need to realize here is that when things are not going well, when we're really struggling, going through some bad times, whether it's something like losing a job or a serious medical diagnosis, lose a loved one. You suddenly wake up and find out your retirement account is gone. When you're going through the really struggles of life, then is when we start looking back to God, and again, that's when God shows up. And when we are in one of those bad situations, we realize that no one else can help us, right. And then we turn to God. But when God pulls us out of those situations, whatever situation you're in, then you can look back at it and realize that the faith that we possess in him gives us some things that show us truly as we need him, he's there. All we have to do is call on him and ask him. So we also need to understand too that if you have true faith, the first place you are going to go is God instead of the last place. So that's kind of how that ties together with, our faith is strongest when it is needed the most, because that's when God shows up in our lives.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, Coach, that so many people today have a break glass in case of emergency line to God, so to speak, and God desires our fellowship constantly, not just when we need Him.
Right.
All right, let's go on to verse 38. And here we see a motion, cave, and stone. We're skipping over a few verses here too, Coach. Verse 38 says, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And it said, so as Jesus groaned in his spirit, which the King James makes reference to earlier, now he came to where Lazarus was buried.
Yeah, and again, we see this says that he was more deeply moved, and that's a situation trying to explain how Jesus really felt as a human being. He is God. He is 100% God. He is 100% man. This is the human feelings actually coming out in Christ. And we see at another place that when he came to Jerusalem, he was on Mount of Olives looking over into the city, and it says he wept for the city, because he knows all this stuff that's going to happen. He knows what it could have been, but yet what man did to it, and it makes him sad. And so he's deeply moved here because these are friends of his, and even though he knows what's going to happen, he knows the feeling that they have, what they're going through. And he wants, this is kind of the empathetic side of Christ. He's feeling like, for them. So this is the human side of Christ that we see here. We should remember that even though Jesus was God, he was also human. So he did experience these human emotions. And then it also talks about, it says he came to the tomb. And tombs, in Israel there, I was fortunate enough when I was there to go to the place where they think Christ's tomb was. And it was a tomb that was simply hewn out of rock back into the mountain side of the mountain there. And normally it would have a big stone to cover it that was oftentimes 3 or 4 feet in diameter. And but the thing that we find out is some of these graves were not built or were not dug into a rock or into the side of a mountain. Many of them were dug vertically down into the ground. And what this says here, if we read the scripture carefully, it says that the stone was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And that kind of lends us to believe it may have been one of those down into the ground, with the stone laid on top of it. So here's the tombs were still sealed with a heavy stone, and such stones would often have as I said, be really massive and hard to move, as we talked about before. But we see here that too that the stone is what blocks the people from seeing inside, and so that was going to have to be taken care of here before we can go any further with our story.
Yeah, and here we see Jesus moved towards the tomb, and again he was greatly disturbed.
Right.
And I really feel like, Coach, there are several reasons for that, some of which you have touched on. But we have to remember, again, as we try to get into the heart of Jesus here and understand how he's processing it, I really think he's processing it 2 different ways. I think he's processing it as a human, as a man, and he's also processing it as God, right. Which I don't know if God processes anything, but he's viewing it as God. In looking at it as a man, like you said earlier, Lazarus was one of his closest friends. So he's upset about the loss of a friend. And he's also grieving because he's seeing 2 people that he cares deeply about who are also hurt. Then as God, he's looking on the situation, and here he is looking at death again.
Right.
And like you said earlier, death is not supposed to be part of mankind's equation here. So he's really, death is foreign to Jesus' divine nature, and he despises it. So that's another reason why what's going on. And then you have those in the crowd that are standing there really in unbelief. They still don't believe Jesus is who he says he is.
Right.
So there's a lot going on here that we can grasp a hold of, as we try to get into the heart of Jesus and look at some things through his eyes, regardless whether it's the human side or the divine side.
Right, right.
And that takes us to verse 39. Here we see request, objection, response. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. And the King James says, he stinketh, which everybody knows that. But in a brief point of command, Jesus ordered the men nearby to remove the stone.
Right. He said we had to take the stone away so they could actually see down inside. But the first thing you notice is Martha has an objection. When she said, but Lord, are you sure you want to do this? He's been in there 4 days. and we know that the odor is not going to be pleasant.
Yeah.
She says, coming out of there. So Martha's concerned again, not knowing what Jesus is doing. She's looking at it from human point of view again. And again, I can't emphasize enough that that's our problem today. People don't want to believe God, what God is saying, because they don't take into account his supernatural abilities.
Right.
Everything's got to be scientific or whatever before people will believe it. And that's totally the wrong way to look at things. So that's how Martha was still looking at it. But she objects there, but Jesus, of course, goes ahead and tells them to take the stone off. And because, unlike the Egyptians who would mummify their bodies, Jews didn't do that.
Right.
They would put things on it to anoint the body, but they didn't embalm them like the Egyptians did. So as we said, because of the weather and the climate, they started decomposing the bodies right away. That's why they wanted them buried in the same day if possible. So Martha's concern still is from the human aspect.
Right. Well, there are 3 resurrections recorded in the Bible up to this point, Coach, other than the Lord himself. And we know of a little girl that was brought back to life. We know of a young man that was brought back to life, and an older man. The point is that all 3 were dead, the older man being Lazarus. One person cannot be more dead than the other.
No.
But the only difference lay in the degree of decay. And if this is not true of sinners today, when you think about it, I mean, the moral church member is not decayed like the person on Skid Row, but he still is dead. I mean, that's what people fail to remember. And what people don't realize, this 4th day is significant because the other 2 that had been resurrected up to this point were still in that 3-day period that we talked about.
Right.
Lazarus is outside that 4-day period. So at this point, it doesn't matter whether it's 4 days or 400 years.
Right.
As far as him being able to do it. It also doesn't matter whether he was buried the way we're going to read about in a second, or he was cremated.
Right.
Jesus still had the power to resurrect him from the dead.
Right. And also, we need to understand that according to the law, when Martha's objection, one of them may have been that, if a Jewish man touched a dead body, they would become unclean immediately. And I found that you find that a couple things, interesting things there. Again, when I was in Israel, whenever we were outside on the Mount of Olives looking across the Kidron Valley to the eastern side of the walls of Jerusalem, there's a gate there. It's called the Eastern Gate, but that gate is totally blocked up right now. And right in front of that gate is a Muslim cemetery. And the reason that the Muslims have done that is because they understand the prophecy concerning Jesus coming back, even though they don't want to admit it. They realize just what we were saying here. Jesus, who is going to be our priest, our high priest, a Jewish priest could not even attend the funeral because they could not go into the graveyard anyway because they would be unclean. So the Muslim put first of all, I think the Ottoman Empire is the one that sealed up the gate, but then the Muslims put the cemetery there, knowing Jesus, being a priest, would not cross or go through that cemetery. And so between those two things, they think they've got Jesus shut out. But there's a whole new story in that as well. But it's interesting how they believe the same things that we're talking about right here.
Yeah, that is interesting. All right, let's go on to verse 40. And it says, "Then Jesus said, 'Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?'" So in response to Martha's objection, Jesus had to stop and remind her that she needed to believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's just he also is making mention here, of course, of the glory of God. Yep. He's getting ready to say, Martha, I told you all along these things I've been telling you about. Do you believe in the resurrection and all? He says, and you tell me you believe I'm the Messiah, but honey, you ain't seen nothing yet. So, he says, you are going to see the glory of God. He says, you're going to see something that you will certainly solidify your faith, because you're going to see the actual glory of God in what I'm going to do next.
If you look at all of us today, Coach, isn't our faith similar to Martha's?
Sure.
In
many cases, not as strong.
That's right.
Because she had a pretty strong faith.
It's still in its formative stage, so to speak. And if you go back and study the Bible, and you look at all the spiritual giants that are listed in the Bible in history, mm-hmm. they're all about the same.
Yeah.
Like what we're talking about here. They grew in their faith as God grew them.
Yeah.
And that's the same with us today.
Yeah.
We have that same ability to grow in our faith. So, all right, let's go on to verses 41 and 42. See, prayer, belief, command. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." So at this point in the narrative, the men followed Jesus' command.
Yeah, they took the stone away, but then we notice that Jesus did something not unusual for him, but he kind of stopped and he prayed to God. And it's interesting what he did and why he did it. It says, Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Jesus already knew what he was going to do when he got to the grave of Lazarus. He had already been in communion with the Father, and I'm sure he asked him for the power and to allow him to do what he wanted to do. And so he's saying also that this is in the past. He knew that he was given the authority to do what he was about to do.
Yeah.
And he says that I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here. Now we start to see what this is all about. Jesus, this prayer was not a silent prayer. He prayed it for everyone to hear. And when he says, Father, he calls him the intimate name for Father, which is Abba, and so he's saying or calling him Father, and making a statement with that. And he says that so that they may believe that you sent me. So now we see that Jesus is telling these people that I came for a reason here, and it wasn't on my own accord, but it was because I've been sent by my Father. So in essence, he's claiming to be the Messiah to all of them, and also having them realize that he's not doing this alone. It's he and his Father are going to do this great event that's going to show the glory of God.
Yeah, his prayer spoken within the hearing of all who were standing by. Mm-hmm. is a public declaration of Jesus' identity with God.
Right.
And an identity that says he and the Father are one. And what I'm going to say next, Coach, is not recorded in Scripture anywhere, and I haven't even heard this before, but I bet the Jewish leaders broke out in hives when he said that, at least sweating bullets.
Yeah, or at least they were, did you hear what he said?
But, what a blessing if you think about all the different types of people that were in that crowd. Mm-hmm. What a blessing it would have been to hear Jesus praying out loud to his Father, the intimate relationship that the two have. And everybody there, just like processing death differently, everybody there would have processed that statement differently as well. And that takes us to verse 43, and we're going to combine 43 and 44 here today. And it says, when he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So then when the crowd, this whole time he's been preparing the crowd for what was about to happen. So with the crowd prepared, Jesus cried out in a loud voice and shouted the words that only he could speak. Right, and it's Lazarus, come forth, and that leads us right into that next question, which is we kind of threw in here at this point. It says, why do you think that Jesus called Lazarus by name? And the only thing that we can say is, had he not called him by name, everybody in that cemetery would have come out of their graves. If he would have just said, "Come forth," and that sounds kind of silly, but it's not. Any believer that would hear his name would have come out of their grave had he not specifically said Lazarus. Yeah. And I really, in my own thoughts, have decided pretty much that when we are raptured into heaven, I really think that Jesus is going to use that same type of command. Come forth. I mean, he's not going to call one name. He may say, "Children, come home," or "Children, come forth," but it's going to be that type of voice that we're going to hear. Yeah, Jesus had to precisely call out the name of Lazarus because that's exactly who he wanted to come out at that time. And like you said, he may have had quite a few come out, whoever could hear him. But so we can see why all three persons Jesus raised from the dead, Lazarus was the only one whose name was mentioned. Mm-hmm. And because unlike the other two, he was already buried. Right. He was already in the ground. Jesus had to call his name not only because he wanted to show those around in generations to come that he alone has supreme power over the spirit of death, but also for us to know that we shall see our loved ones once again who died in the Lord, which is what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And there's a really neat verse here in John chapter 10, looking at verses 14 and 15. And this is another reason why Jesus called Lazarus specifically. "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Mm-hmm. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." That tells us he knows every one of us by name. Right, and a little further down there it says, "And my sheep know my voice." Yep. So also in verse 44 here too, Coach, unlike the risen Lord, Lazarus still wore his grave clothes. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing in itself. Yeah, it makes you kind of wonder how he got up out of the grave. But he was still in the clothes. I don't know whether he hopped up or how he got out exactly, but he was still in his grave clothes, including the napkin across the face that we hear about. And if you compare that to what happened to Jesus when they found the clothes or the wrappings of Jesus, Jesus was already gone out of them. And basically what the description seems to say, it was as if he simply just rose out of the grave clothes, and they just kind of fell off and down to where he was lying. And the idea, it also tells us that the napkin was folded and put in another place there. So Jesus totally came out of there and out of the grave
but the clothes were left behind. And this is a difference there with what we see with Lazarus.
There's a lot of things going on here, and sometimes we get a little short on time of being able to unpack them all, but one thing that's really noteworthy is if you look here, Jesus could have moved the stone, but he had people there doing it. He could have unwrapped the grave clothes, but he had people there doing that. Jesus wants to be his hands and feet in the world today and do what we can. So Jesus wasn't going to do things that man could do at this time. And it was a really good illustration as to that. Lazarus was bound hand and foot, and he couldn't free himself. The believer, that would be us today, is not to be bound by the grave clothes of the old life and should walk in freedom of the new life, just like Lazarus was getting ready to. We have to be able to put off the grave clothes and put on the grace clothes of the new life, and it is a poor testimony for a Christian to carry with him the things of the old life.
Right. It
would be like Lazarus coming out of the grave and being halfway unwrapped the rest of his life. That's what the analogy would be.
Right. Yeah.
And that really takes us to that very last question. Why was the resurrection of Lazarus so miraculous?
Well, the first thing is that if you look at the whole event, what we've been trying to unpack it today, this is an exact picture of what the resurrection is like that we will see. And if you look at the things that Lazarus went through, and we've kind of alluded to some of these, but this is a very good picture of what Jesus was trying to tell everybody. This is what's going to happen. This is what the resurrection is. I have the power to resurrect people from the dead, and including myself, which he will one day. And so he's saying here that this is a miracle because, first of all, he prayed, we saw, to his Father in heaven to help, not necessarily help him, but to show the people that he and God are Father and Son. And we know that the onlookers who heard him talking to his Father, there's no question but what he was telling them, he is my Father. And he was claiming his messiahship here. Even the Jewish leaders couldn't deny that Lazarus wasn't dead. They couldn't come out because everybody knew he was. But now he's alive. So Jesus has raised him from death into life. And that had to do a lot of give him a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really did. And the death and resurrection of Lazarus teaches us, first of all, that God's timing is always perfect.
Right.
Second of all, it teaches that God's miracles are not about our faith, but about his power. And it wouldn't have mattered what Martha believed. Jesus still was going to raise Lazarus from the dead.
Right.
The lead follower would get out of the way, basically what he was saying. But and finally, the death and resurrection of Lazarus teaches God uses our circumstances to glorify himself. And, I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff we could talk about with that. And that really takes us to that thought to remember. And this is really cool. The grave is not the end, Coach. And could you take that and give us some final thoughts as we wrap it up here today?
Okay, the grave is not the end, it's the beginning for Christians. And again, we all come back to that question he asked Martha, believest thou me? And that's the question we all have to answer. Again, you all who have been listening to us, you have no excuse because you've heard it again. That's basically what the gospel is about. Do you believe that Jesus Christ resurrected just as he has resurrected Lazarus here? You got to believe in the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then you need to accept him into your heart and give your life to him. And that's the part that, as Mike said, when Lazarus came out, he didn't have part of his clothes left on him. He shed them all. And that's what we have to do with our old self and turn our life over to Christ. And then when that resurrection day comes, whether you are in the ground or whether you're still alive on earth, you will be resurrected and meet Jesus in the air to be taken to heaven.
Yep. Yeah, and we began this entire segment, Coach, with an ornery kind of question. Mm-hmm. Do you realize there are two types of death and one stinks?
Right.
And I can tell you the physical death does stink. Mm-hmm. And then also one of the spiritual deaths does stink.
Right.
And the question is, which spiritual death would you prefer? Mm-hmm. And we would hope you would prefer the one that has God as your Father attached to it. And that's the only way you can have that is to believe in His Son, Jesus Christ. And if you have any questions about that, we would love to answer them for you. Again, this is Pinegrove Baptist Church in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and you should see the contact information on the screen. For those of you who watch week to week, we would encourage you to share these messages with your friends out on whatever social media platform it is that you subscribe to. It just gets the word out, and we are now out on a podcast form, out on Spotify and another one or two, and we would just encourage you to get those out as well. We thank each one of you for making us part of your day, and we certainly don't take it for granted, and we do see it as a very, very dear privilege. Next week, the study that we're going to have is The Word Gives Peace. So we've talked about death quite a bit. Next week, we're going to talk about peace. So until next time, this is Mike Cornell along with Coach Ron Lathey and our production manager, Andy Holbrook, wishing everybody have a blessed week, and we hope to see you real soon.